Hey, remember the NES? Well, aren't you just a regular Pepperidge Farms? It's an NES recap on NES Works.
You belong to the city. You belong to the night.
The overwhelming majority of people who subscribe to this channel came here for NES Works, and I haven't talked about the NES all year. So let me make it up to you before diving back into Master System and the shambling corpse of Intellivision by finally making a video I've been meaning to put together for a long-ass time. Yes, it's a best of video. I did one of these for the first half of the Master System's library a while back, so it seems only fair that the NES gets similar treatment. But don't expect things to be fair and equal here. Sega published only a fraction of the 8-bit cartridges that Nintendo fans had access to, so I need to break up the best of NES into more than two parts. How many? Hard to say. Who knows how much longer we are for the world at this point. For this episode, though, I'm looking at the games of 1985, 86, and 87. Something like 80 games in total, from which I'm picking the best 10 releases. As you might expect, this is based on a rigorous scientific process called whatever I damn well feel like, based on my opinion at the moment. But you know, I have played all these games quite a bit, and I feel like I have a pretty solid basis for formulating an opinion. Feel free to disagree with my opinions in the comments. It won't change a thing about how I feel, of course, but YouTube system loves engagement, so go on, leave a few angry responses and make me rich beyond my wildest imagination. Before we begin the countdown in earnest, I need to throw in an honorable mention for a game that didn't quite make the cut, but which deserves respect for its place in NES history and for the nutty choice that its publisher made in publishing it all. I'm speaking, of course, of Rygar. Rygar tends to be pretty overlooked today. For that matter, it didn't really click with most people back in the day either. That's because Rygar is not what it says on the box. It says Rygar. But aside from the fact that you control a beefy shirtless man who attacks evil with an extraordinarily large mystical yo-yo in front of glorious sunsets, this Rygar has very little to do with the Rygar that showed up in arcades in 1986. That arcade Rygar was a mindless linear action game about killing things and sometimes jumping on their heads while you ran left to right and occasionally gave bodybuilder statues a big ol' hug in order to move between levels. This Rygar appears to be that until you reach the second stage, which spans several screens on both axes and contains a handful of doors that you can enter to move into new places, one of which completely changes the perspective of the action to a top-down viewpoint. It also includes an experience system that boosts the hero's power as he wails on bad guys, nonlinear exploration, and an inventory element that requires you to gather tools in order to progress. Folks, it is a Metroidvania. Except that it shipped a month or two before Metroid, and the only Vania that the NES kids knew at the time was a dumb linear barbarian action game exactly like the arcade Rygar. There had not been any NES games that worked like this at all at the time of Rygar's debut in late spring 1987. And yet here we are, the NES fan base's first taste of exploratory action RPGs, before we even knew what those terms meant. I can speak from experience that most NES fans who played Rygar at the time regarded it with dismay and confusion. Except I was kind of a weirdo. The first NES game I bought after acquiring my own system early the following year was Metroid. So when I borrowed Rygar from a disappointed friend, my thought was, oh, I guess this is just how video games work. And it is, today, but not in 1987. I don't know what Tecmo was huffing when they decided to thrust this upon a legion of unprepared children, but bless them for getting high on that mysterious supply. Speaking of Metroid, here at number 10 on the list is Metroid. A game that might actually be even more opaque than Rygar. Honestly, I could get behind someone suggesting that Rygar deserves a place in the top 10 over Metroid. It's a more manageable game that requires a lot less trial and error. But since this list uses the very scientific methodology of basing everything strictly on my personal opinions, here we are. And frankly, Metroid deserves credit simply for being so innovative and for leading the way. Nintendo and Intelligent Systems condensed the flow and methods of a computer adventure game into a console action-shaped package. The hero, Samus Aran, does not use menus or word prompts in order to navigate the world. Instead, she interacts, explores, and advances by using action verbs: run, shoot, jump, collect, roll, bomb, launch, spin. The game does get bogged down in spaces where you need to roll around bombing every object in sight in search of hidden passages forward, and the need to shoot monsters in order to collect health refills every time you restart the game is a real bummer. But Metroid's world is huge, persistent, and complex. It takes a newcomer quite a while to master, And the challenge here has as much to do with the immensity of the zones you traverse as it does the power of the monsters there. Metroid would launch a long-running franchise, but more importantly, it influenced a ton of games through the years, and it certainly made Rygar a lot easier to parse. The Mega Man series turned out to be one of the defining brands of the NES. You might not have guessed that turn of events ever taking place based on the first Mega Man game, which is perfectly good, but still pretty rough, like a rough draft. It has glitchy collision physics, a superfluous scoring system, wildly unbalanced difficulty, and a bunch of the alternate weapons are borderline useless. On the other hand, just take a look at how much Mega Man did compared to other action games of the era. For starters, it looked and sounded a notch or two above competitors. The graphics demonstrated an actual sense of artistic direction. With a charismatically cartoonish hero, look at him blink when he stands still for a few seconds, and equally whimsical monsters to fight. Not only that, but Mega Man invited replay. If you could manage to complete the surprisingly difficult adventure, you could tackle it again and have a different experience. That comes down to the level select system, which allowed players to tackle the game's first 6 stages in any order they wanted. Once you defeated the boss lurking at the end of each level, you'd claim that boss's weapon as your own, which you could then use at will until its power ran dry. Figuring out the best way to apply each weapon was half the fun of Mega Man, with each enemy type, including bosses, suffering a weakness to one or more weapon. Despite the shockingly high difficulty level and some frustrating brick wall scenarios, Mega Man really raised the bar for action games on NES. The crazy part is that its sequel would raise it even higher. I don't like sports games, and I especially don't like pro wrestling games. But even a miser like me has to admit that pro wrestling for NES was, in fact, very good. With fluid controls, weird characters, and a wide range of play options, pro wrestling focused on the goofy, over-the-top side of the sport without sacrificing playability. Compared to literally every other wrestling game of the era, pro wrestling worked as a game even for people with little interest in the subject. Snagging your rival in a submission hold and gnawing on their skull as the Amazon will never not be a hilarious way to ruin a friendship. Speaking of friends, the truest friends never say die. That's because they're Goonies, the stars of the show of this game, the sequel to the game of the movie. This is not an adaptation of a movie called The Goonies 2. There was never such a thing. And if there were, it probably wouldn't have had anything to do with kidnapped mermaids based on Little Orphan Annie. Though I guess we could be surprised if those rumors of a sequel finally gelling based on Ke Huy Quan's ascendant star pan out. No, The Goonies 2 is the sequel to a game that very few people in America played because it only showed up in arcades. It takes that game's fundamentals, running around as Mikey Walsh trying to rescue his Goonie friends, then adds a layer of Rygar-like nonlinearity to the whole affair. Though I suppose since this showed up on Famicom a few weeks before Rygar, maybe it's the other way around? The Goonies 2 features some surprising quality-of-life features for a game of this vintage, most notably a real-time map screen. That turns out to be pretty important since the world of the Goonies 2 is kind of confusing. It consists of a front side and a back side, and Mikey ducks into doors to pass between them. Inside the doors, the game temporarily becomes a graphical adventure where you choose menu commands to search for items, hints, friends, and doors. The adventure mode would be disorienting enough on its own, but some of them function as so-called warp zones that take you to places on the reverse side of the map that don't appear to link up to your point of departure from the front side. And many of the doors and conduits only appear with the use of tools, like hammers and X-ray specs. It's a pretty strange game, though it does ultimately make sense how Konami arrived here if you understand the throw-it-at-the-wall approach to game design that dominated Japanese console development at the time. Thanks to its familiar license, strong visuals and controls, and general Konami-ness, it gave many kids in the US a taste of the wild world of Famicom action-adventure evolution. It has flaws, yeah, but The Goonies 2 kicked off a trend of NES games based on movies that went absolutely ham with their creative ambition rather than just meekly being a bad Mario clone or whatever. But like I said before, I hate sports games, except that is for golf games, and that's all because of Golf for NES, the NES golf game by Nintendo and HAL. A lot of developers in the early 80s were sort of circling around the principles of design that would make a perfect interpretation of the sport of golf. HAL Labs and Nintendo got there first and figured it out. This cartridge contains only a single course, but that was par for the course, so to speak, in 1984 when Golf first shipped for Famicom. It's a simple game, yes, but it plays well and feels totally intuitive. Golf for NES was the first game that really and truly locked down how to present the sport in video game form. You don't putter around the green even when you putt. You don't worry about your caddy, you don't drive a golf cart. Golf takes an almost completely hands-off approach, playing out entirely through menus, like an RPG almost, before menu-based RPGs even existed on console. A round of golf consists of moving automatically from hole to hole. You select your club, take stock of the distance to the green and the direction of the wind, determine the direction you want to face for your stroke, and finally, take a swing by choosing your power with a real-time meter. It's very technical, but it also demands a touch of intuition, especially once you approach the cup, where the viewpoint shifts and the visuals depict the lay of the green so that you can determine the direction and power of your putt. Gosh, listen to me, using actual golf terminology to describe the gameplay. I hate that I know how golf works now, but golf, and the many games that adopted its mechanics, is so good that I can't be mad about it. Really, all of Nintendo's black box sports games set the standard for their respective genres on consoles, but golf is the one that plays the most like modern takes on its sport. And then we have the sports game that broke Nintendo's NES packaging away from the black box style, a game that very few others have ever resembled, let alone bested. I'm speaking, of course, of Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! Back in Tyson's prime, when he was a fiery newcomer to the sport who could have crushed a dozen YouTubers in the ring as casually as he yawned, Nintendo made a brilliant marketing coup by tying their game to his name. Well, brilliant until he turned out to be a domestic abuser, at which point the company reissued the game as just Punch-Out! It works just as well either way. Tyson may have lent the game a certain pop cultural cachet, cemented through the infamous Fun Club news code, that sent you directly to the title match so that you could lose pathetically to Tyson in a matter of seconds. But Punch-Out! Didn't need a famous name to be amazing. It was amazing all on its own, which is all the more amazing when you consider the fact that it had to recreate a graphically awesome arcade machine with the NES's hardware, which lacked the power to match the arcade machine's massive boxers and transparent oversized protagonist. Nintendo even created new tech to power Punch-Out! On NES, a unique memory management chip that gave the system the ability to render the oversized cartoon-style opponents you have to beat, but not powerful enough to render a playable character to match. So Punch-Out! On NES leans into the David and Goliath vibe, pitting your tiny pugilist against a host of towering foes. It's kind of a boxing game in that you jab and hook and uppercut, but it comes off more like a succession of boss battles by way of a rhythm action game. Little Mac can only land punches when his opponents lower their guard, and the game becomes a process of looking for opportunities to strike and knowing when to block, or better yet, to duck. Each boxer you face has unique techniques and unique ticks. To succeed, you need to learn their skills and tells, which will allow you to react by evading and counter-striking. Your oversized rivals have equally massive personalities, from the flamboyant Don Flamingo to the massive but clumsy King Hippo. The game trades in stereotypes, as each character comes from a different country, but it's hard to take them too seriously or be offended because each of the rivals is cool and intimidating in their own way. It's hard to explain here in 2025 just how much of an impression the lively animation and personality of Punch-Out! Made nearly 40 years ago. There seriously had never been a console game that looked or played like it before, and with its emphasis on split-second reactions, it's the best excuse you can come up with to justify keeping a CRT around. Early black box NES games tend not to show up on best of lists like this. Not because they were bad, but because they were good. It's just that later games turned out to be even better. Balloon Fight, though, that still rules. Yes, it's just a brazen ripoff of Williams' Joust, but sometimes the pupil surpasses the master. A simple, single-screen action game in which players rapidly press the action button in order to flutter around the arena, attempting to pop the balloons of enemies and knock them out of the air without losing their own balloons, Balloon Fight really embodies the early Nintendo design ethos. It takes the surreal yet serious stylings of Joust and makes them whimsical, trading vultures and lava trolls for weird little balloonists and dopey-looking fish. It also plays perfectly well solo, but much better with a friend. Although, how long you will remain friends after a session of Balloon Fight is an open question. Balloon Fight also embodies the Nintendo cooperative competitive spirit seen in games like Mario Bros. You want to work with the other player to a point. Once you reach that point, you can wreck their day the same as any enemy. Burst their balloons, bump them into enemies, corral them into hazards like the fish or the lightning bolts that zap around the arena. Or you can just be antisocial and play the Balloon Trip mode, an infinitely scrolling journey through an obstacle course accompanied by one of the best 8-bit ditties ever. Sure, it's simple and derivative, but Balloon Trip and Balloon Fight stand the test of time, holding up as one of Nintendo's best early works. Before Metroidvania, there was Castlevania. This one had no Metroid in it, just pure, awesome arcade-style action. Castlevania kind of feels like Konami played Ghosts and Goblins and said, okay, that's great, but what if it were more fun and less random? Castlevania plays with the same rigid control mechanics as Ghosts and Goblins, but everything about it feels more fundamentally fair. There are very few randomly spawning foes to be found in Castlevania. The Grim Reaper's mini-scythes and the eagles that fly in to deposit annoying fleamen in a couple of stages are about it. Even the ever-hated Medusa heads appear predictably, flying in simple sign patterns and always spawning at the edge of the screen on the same horizontal line occupied by protagonist Simon Belmont. The world of Castlevania is really built around Simon. His height, his speed, his jump range, his attack range. This makes for a sometimes vexingly difficult game, but one that never, ever feels unreasonable or unfair. Simon wields a whip as his primary weapon, which gives him excellent forward attack distance and power, but also demands that he momentarily stop to wind up and strike. Castlevania demands you learn the cadences of gameplay, timing your actions to deliver damage and defend yourself without leaving Simon vulnerable to enemy actions. And you quickly learn the tricks of the game too, like the way whipping while leaping forward allows you to attack without losing momentum. Or the capabilities of the secondary weapons Simon can collect to supplement his whip. Despite only consisting of 6 stages, Castlevania offers a lot of room for varied tactics and never stops presenting you with evolving, layered challenges. All of that in an adventure that looks great, making excellent use of the NES's limited resolution and color options to create a haunted castle that should seem garish but somehow comes off as moody and atmospheric. And it sounds great, with easily the best soundtrack to have appeared in any console game to that point. To complete the package, Konami wrapped it in a film-themed presentation that treats this as a sort of journey through the best moments of Hammer and Universal horror films of old. Subsequent Castlevanias would be bigger, more ambitious, and more impressive in every respect. The series rarely felt as lean and focused as it does here. Although the second best game of this early era of the NES has long since been surpassed by other games, including its own sequels, there's no denying that Super Mario Bros. Was a masterpiece. Is a masterpiece, will be a masterpiece, it kind of transcends time. Super Mario Bros. Has become a sort of iconic proxy image for the NES itself. The game hit bestseller status as soon as it launched in Japan, as did its strategy guide, and it would have become an easy bestseller here as well, even if Nintendo hadn't packed it with many models of the NES console. But since they did, that means Americans associate Super Mario with the NES perhaps even more powerfully than kids who grew up with a Famicom. If you owned an NES, chances are pretty good that you owned Super Mario Bros. Like a lot of early NES games, Super Mario feels slight and a little simple by the standards of 2025. By the standards of gaming in 1985, however, it kind of blew everything else out of the water. Sega had Hang-On, Nintendo had Super Mario Bros. Games that defined and redefined genres while pushing the state-of-the-art forward in 1985. At that point, you simply hadn't seen many action games that featured scrolling action. And those other games certainly didn't contain 32 mostly unique levels. And they definitely didn't incorporate best-in-class play control physics, varied environments with alternating input modes, and a ridiculous number of secrets. Super Mario did all of these things, and it revolved around an already popular character, and it represented the absolute pinnacle of what the NES could accomplish without the assistance of peripherals or cart-based memory management devices. It was a towering achievement on a scale that you just don't see in the present day and age. Sure, Grand Theft Auto 6 will sell like gangbusters, but will it actually revolutionize the medium the way Super Mario Bros. Did? Just look at how many games sprang up around the very specific creative design philosophy of we wanted to make Super Mario Bros., but bigger, better, or according to our own weird aspirations. Wonder Boy and Adventure Island, Atlantis no Nazo, Alex Kidd The Lost Stars, Milon's Secret Castle, and countless others. And none of them quite managed to match the freewheeling style and confidence of Super Mario Bros., a game that remains eminently playable today in a way you rarely see with other works of this era. If any game deserved to define entire genres, it was this one. As for the best game of the NES's first 2 years of life, well, it turns out that I'm a boring mundane as well. All that hype and marketing paid off and taught me to love that glittering golden cartridge for The Legend of Zelda. But look, The Legend of Zelda really was that big a deal when it hit the NES in the summer of 1987. Look beyond the commercials and the fancy packaging and the endless pre-launch hype for its long-delayed sequel and the exhaustive post-launch coverage in Nintendo's publications, and you still have a game that transformed the way console kids and developers alike thought about video games. The Zelda team were not the first creative group who had thought, hey, what if we made a role-playing game except that it's an action game? And you can see that pretty clearly if you have a look at big action RPG hits of the early 80s in Japan. Zelda clearly cribs from Xanadu, the Tower of Druaga, Hideline, and more. The thing is, The Legend of Zelda has that NES-era Nintendo confidence and skill behind it, a laser focus on accessible play, satisfying controls, and rock-solid programming. It pulls together a lot of different concepts and influences that have been floating around in the medium's ether and turns them into a convincing, self-contained adventure that drops players into a big world, allows them to go anywhere they like, and then challenges them to figure out what the heck they're supposed to do. And compared to other RPGs and RPG-like games of the era, Zelda does a lot to nudge players in the right direction. Between in-game clues and all the maps and tips packed into the cartridge, Zelda doubles as training wheels for the entire genre. Although it lacks the tightly crafted puzzle structure of its sequels, there's something to be said for the sheer openness of the original Zelda. Like Mega Man, it invites you to approach it on your own terms and in the order of your choosing. Aside from a few choke points that require specific tools or other requirements to pass, Zelda has a free-form style that lets you play it and replay it on your own terms. It's the kind of game that's fun to revisit casually or with determination, even once you've cracked its most infuriating secrets. I wouldn't claim that anyone of any age could just pick up the first Zelda and immediately fall in love with it today. That's not really what this ranking is about. Zelda hit the NES like a megaton bomb in 1987. It may not have sold as well as the Mario games, but between introducing open sandbox gameplay and role-playing concepts to millions of kids, adding the option for persistent built-in save features, and generally just being a memorable adventure loaded with both fascination and frustration, it really stands out as the peak of the NES's first couple of years of life. And again, things would only get better from here. Next time on NES Works, the flip side of the coin.